Have you ever just been like searching around your house, maybe cleaning things out, and all of a sudden you found a puzzle piece? Have you ever done that? Like I just did that the other day. I was in the living room and I was like, how did this get here? Like, where did it come from? And you know, if you pick up that puzzle piece and look at it, you're going to be like, you're probably going to have no idea where it came from because you're just seeing one piece, right? Like, oh, are we good? Cheryl's making a scene. Oh, so, do you guys need me to come?
No,
I can help.
Okay.
All right.
We're good. We're sisters. We're good.
Anyway, so just imagine picking up a puzzle piece. And you know how it is when you're doing a puzzle, there's always the one piece that's like missing, right? Or the missing sock or whatever it is. But like I picked up this piece and honestly, I was just like, I was lost. Because I had no idea which puzzle it was going to be part of. I would have had to go find the puzzles, of course, and then look through them and see, okay, what's a good match? And, I was thinking, sometimes we sort of read the Bible that way if we haven't really become familiar with the whole thing, right? We can take a piece, and we see it all the time, don't we? That people they miss God because they've taken one piece of his puzzle and they've made it something that it's not, right? And so what we've kind of been doing the past few weeks is we've been trying to take some of these pieces from a part that's a little less familiar to us, the Old Testament, right? And so we've been taking these pieces and we've been putting them into the bigger picture, the bigger puzzle, so that we can see where they fit in. Because what we find is that when we start putting the pieces together, it's this beautiful picture of that ultimately is Jesus on the cross. So even these stories that we hear of like, okay, Jonah and this fish or this whale or whatever it is, it's like, how does that connect with Jesus? You know, sometimes we go, is it even a real story? Are these real historical events? You know, this Moses guy, is it really just Charlton Heston? Or, was there this real Moses?
I hope not.
But but we start to see that when we look at these pieces in the bigger puzzle, it's actually truly amazing how we see the plan of God plotted out throughout history. Like, it seriously blows my mind when I start looking into it. And I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. So last week, what we talked about, if you missed it, was our approach to God. Because what I'm trying to do, too, is I'm trying to ask God, like, how does this apply to us today? Right? And we looked at the tabernacle and how this pattern of the tabernacle revealed God's plan for atonement. Okay, one of those fancy Christian words, right? But it just means like making things right between us and God, atonement, purification, worship, and ultimately encountering him as we move closer and closer. Remember, to the holy place, the most holy place, the holy of holy places, right? Which was where the very presence of God was. And we see that even now through Jesus, we can come to God through Jesus as our tabernacle, right? Because he paid the price for atonement. He provided our purification. And then we come in worship and prayer before God, the incense rising before him, and we come into his presence with singing and with praise. And it's just amazing, truly amazing. In fact, I don't know, I couldn't remember if I shared this, and I really wanted to share this. I wanted to make sure I did. John 1:1, it's where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it says in verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Okay, and the Word is Sunday school answer.
Yeah.
Jesus, right? The Word is Jesus. And so it says Jesus, so God became flesh, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt, because how many times do we use the word dwelt? Hung out with us, whatever. That actually means he tabernacled among us. Isn't that cool? We miss that. Like, we don't see that because we don't read the language. But Jesus tabernacled among us. He was our tabernacle to approach God. That's so cool. I had to share that. So that's from last week. Out with the old, in with the new, right? So this is what we've been looking at. We've been spending time in the first 5 books of the Bible, especially. I actually thought I was going to fly through them, but they are so deep that I just keep okay, so we're making it to Leviticus today, okay? Leviticus. And so we've looked at Cain and Abel, we've looked at Joseph, we looked at Moses and the tabernacle, and how Jesus fits all those pieces of the puzzle. And today now we're going to look at Leviticus. So this is real high level here, right? And my hope, though, is that you'll really gain an appreciation for this book that really, in a lot of ways, seems very different culturally from us. Okay? That's why we have trouble sometimes making the connection, because they were in a different place. I mean, the ancient Near East is not the same as Western South Dakota here, right? So we have to kind of bridge that gap between the cultures. And but when we do, it's just amazing. And one of the things that we're going to look at today is this crazy thing about sacrifices, right? So this just isn't one of those things that we do in Western culture anymore, okay? There are still some places where they do sacrifice. Now, have you ever thought to yourself, what in the world is up with sacrifices? Like, why did God make them, bring these animals and things and, slaughter them and, we're talking about blood and all this crazy stuff. I don't know about you, but, I've always just been that's a little bit beyond me. Some of you guys, maybe you were on a farm or a ranch and maybe that wasn't so foreign of a concept to you. I don't know, but anybody with me there? Okay. So I said last week that God's desire has been one thing, and that's really to be present among his people. God desires to be present here with us today. He wants to dwell with us. That's why he created the tabernacle in the first place, to be among his people. And I shared some verses that pointed to that. And, it's one thing to be present. It's another thing to have relationship. You could sit in a room with somebody, right? You could sit in a room with somebody. You could be present with them. Okay, we're all present here with each other right now. But that doesn't mean that you have relationship, right? And God's desire is to go a little deeper, not just to be present, but his desire is to have relationship with us. And as much as we want to talk about unconditional love, and all of us want to have kind of this ideal of unconditional love, but the truth is that relationships are transactional. And what that means is there's a two-way exchange in a relationship. And if I was to say it poetically, I might say it's sort of like a dance, right? Like a two-person dance, not a one-person dance. And some of us, we've been in relationships, haven't we, that have been very one-sided. And you would probably say, actually, it wasn't really a relationship. It wasn't a relationship. A marriage without intimacy, that's not a marriage. Relationships are two-way. They are transactional. And so God desires to have this two-way connection with his people, with us. But the problem is this, with God, it's this thing that he is perfection, right? He is perfect. He is pure. God is holy. He is the standard that everything else in this world, in this universe, in any other universes that exist out there, if there are any, Like, he is the standard that is held for everything. And that's what holiness is. And his people, well, we're not the standard, right? We are not there. Right from the start, we saw that we fell short of his of his desires for his remarkable creation called humankind. We fell short. You fell short. I fell short. Adam and Eve, they fell short, right? God had this beautiful plan, this beautiful people, and we could not hold his standard for us. In other words, it sort of became a one-sided relationship because we couldn't hold up our side of the bargain, right? So we're like that spouse who just wants to run off with another partner or do their own thing, right? It's just not going to work. So God created a way to right the wrongs. And so that when the relationship became lopsided, at least there was a temporary fix. Okay, it's the duct tape solution. And it worked because it wasn't meant to last forever. Okay? And for the Israelites, that temporary fix was this idea of these sacrifices. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how they worked, how God saw them. See, our offense is so nasty that we really do not deserve to live.
That's right.
That's how nasty our offense is. And God, in his infinite wisdom, chose sacrifice, I believe, for a few reasons. Okay? The first is because it's transactional. It gave his people a means of coming to him so that it was a two-sided relationship. Okay? Sacrifice it's transactional. Number two, it's a substitution. Okay? So instead of his people paying the price for their offense, God allowed them to transfer the guilt to a substitute, to an animal that basically represented them and their sin. So they put that guilt onto that animal or into that offering, essentially. And number three, it defined the boundaries. And every relationship that is a healthy relationship, it always has clear boundaries. And both parties in the relationship, and that's what makes relationships so tricky, right? Is we kind of sometimes we shift our boundaries, or sometimes we're like, hey, I didn't like that. That bothered me, right? And so you have to kind of talk through it, communicate. You have to have boundaries. You have to know where you're pressing buttons, right? Do I hear a name? Come on.
Amen.
Come on. You guys know where you're pressing buttons, where it's okay, things are okay. You have expectations. God set those expectations very clearly for his people to be in healthy relationship with him. These are the ways that I think about these sacrifices, and that I think that we need to think about them to make sense of it within our cultural context, right? And so there's another thing that's significant here, and that is that there is a calling that God had for his people. He chose one nation to stand out among the rest. And how were they to stand out? It was to be so evident that God was in their midst and that he was their only God. That's how they had to stand out. Because they were surrounded. Just imagine. Okay, first of all, imagine a nation that really begins with one person. Okay? Abraham. God called this man. He said, he gave him all these promises. You're going to become this amazing nation. Sands on the seashore. There's going to be that many people. And if you're just one guy, that's kind of whoa, really? God, you're going to do that through me, right? And starting a new nation, that's probably not an easy thing. It really probably requires some divine intervention, I would think, to start a new nation. So this is what God is doing. It's a miracle that they became a nation in the first place. But he chose them specifically. in order for this to happen, they had to be different.